So here's a question I bet many of you out there have never asked yourselves. Why is it that fire props cost so much more than LED props? Drex here from Drex Factor Poi, sharing with you the love of poi spinning and flow arts to benefit your body and brain. And today, we're going to have a short lesson in economics and business. Before we dive in, I just want to give a quick shout out to the friends of the channel. Big thanks to Dark Monk, Flow DNA, Flow Fests, Flow Toys, Juggling Calling, Pyroterra Light Toys, Spinballs, and Ultra Poi for helping to make the videos on this channel possible. You can learn more about all these amazing companies and the work that they're doing to support flow artists like yourself by checking out the links that I've got down in the description of this video. And a special thanks to the first non-business friend of the channel, Johnny Howard. Thanks so much for your support, Johnny. All right, so check it. We are gonna go ahead and pop open a couple props here, yeah? So this right here, this is a Orb Poi from Ultra Poi. I am going to pull the little sucker open so we can see what it's made of. Yeah, a little cartridge inside is mostly empty. There's just a little chip on the other end here. This rubber band is a pain in the butt to take off. Finally, cool. So check it out. This is what's inside of there. It's a wee little chip, and it's got like a little battery on it, as well as a switch and an LED right here. And in fact, I can just hit that little micro switch right now to turn on the light for us. Look at that. Cool. So the ones that I use also have these chips in the handles as well. So they sell for, I think it's $135. Without the handles, I think they're closer to $85. All right, and now let's take a look at one of these glorious static rope poi from Juggling Calling, which the head of this is just like an ISIS knot and everything. There's no deeper hardware in here. And of course, we've got our Kevlar rope coming out. And yes, we do indeed have our Ultra knobs on the other end and everything. But by and large, hardware is comparatively a lot simpler. There's no batteries to this. There's no chip. There's no switch. Damn memory card ran out. So a pair of these fire poi from Juggling Calling start at around $130, and if you add these LED knobs onto them, of course, they climb up to $180. Now, by comparison, we've got our Orb Poi Ultra Poi that start at $85 without the LED knobs and then go up to $130 with the LED knobs. So how does the lowest end version of this wind up costing as much as the highest end version of this? So, let us go for a walk, shall we? So I had an interesting conversation with Chad Bennett from Dark Monk the other day, and it essentially confirmed something that I had long suspected about the manufacture of fire props. Namely, that almost all of the costs for them are bound up in labor rather than materials. What do I mean by that? Well, let's say that you spend, say, what, $20 getting the Kevlar that you're going to need in order to make some fire props. Well, you're not just spending those $20 to get a hold of those supplies. You are also going to have to pay somebody to basically tie together your wick and produce something that other people are going to be able to use out of that. And it turns out that the time and energy it takes to produce that wick is not nothing. In fact, it's pretty important, and it winds up being even more important than the materials you put together. And it turns out that manufacturing fire props rather stubbornly resists any attempts to mechanize it. Like, how exactly do you get a machine to tie up a monkey fist knot, for example? And this actually kind of presents a little bit of a problem for us going forward, but to understand why, we really have to talk about the differences between manufacturing fire props versus manufacturing LED props, and everything in between. All right, so let's play a game of which of these things is not like the other. I have a sample of a few popular flow products here on the table, and I think that there are going to be some things that are going to emerge as we take a look at them. So again, here are our pieces for the heads of our Orb Poi Ultra Poi. We have these lovely polycarbonate pieces that fit around this little chip that fits inside of the very top of it, like so. It's a pretty, it's a pretty polished product, I gotta say. And over here, we have the parts of Capsules 2.0 from Flow Toys. Once again, we have these nice two little sides of a polycarbonate shell and everything. And we have this little circuit board with the LEDs, battery, and switch on it. Just like with our other example here, we go ahead and stick all these pieces together and wind up with a completed pod and everything. All of these things fit together seamlessly and are held together likewise with some rubber bands. Now, what do all of these things have in common? Well, basically, you have these circuit boards that you can insert into what's really injection molded shells. Now, here's the thing. I've had friends that have gone down the road of putting together these molds for injection molding, and it costs a lot at the get-go, sometimes tens of thousands of dollars. But the thing is that once you've got the mold, each and every one of these shells that you produce with it only costs you a few cents. So if, for example, you only pay a few cents for the shell and you get, the boards for, I actually have no idea how much the boards cost, so I'm not going to hazard a guess. But I do think that I can probably say that the results mean that you're able to make back the initial kind of investment that you made in getting those molds made up relatively quickly, because your profit margin on each of these winds up being a lot higher. So by contrast, when we look at something like a fire poi, which this is a cathedral head that I made myself for a previous tutorial, y'all can see in that tutorial, basically I had to fold up the Kevlar in order to make this happen, and then kind of drive a hole through it that I then stuck this bolt into. All that's pretty hard work, and it's very, very hands-on work. It's not like I can just set the injection molder going, walk away, and come back and, in a few days, there's a few hundred or a few thousand of these waiting for me. So something I really want you to take away from this is that a lot of the costs involved in creating something like this are upfront. That is, you put a large amount of money up front into creating the molds and designing the boards, and also like doing some of the basic programming, the firmware and the software that you're going to be running on it and everything. But once you've done all that, those initial costs are done. You don't have to pay them again. And so when you start mass producing these, then you can catch up to the initial costs for your investment relatively quickly. On the other hand, for something like this, guess what? You have to pay the exact same labor costs every single time you make one of these things. So large upfront investment, but the costs after the fact are comparatively small, so your profit margins are better. Low upfront investment, but large labor costs, and therefore, you're constantly having to pay back off your investment here. Unless you think I am just beating up on fire poi here, there's also another segment of the flow arts and specifically poi spinning world wherein these labor costs become really important, and that is when it comes to contact poi. There's also a handmade multi-step process that's involved in producing sets of these. This is one of the contact poi that I produced back when I was regularly selling them. And I remember you'd have to go through the process of drilling out the ball, tying off the rope. You'd have to sink the rope into the ball to get the two things to cooperate and everything. And, at my peak, I could do this in kind of an assembly line process where once I got the balls in from the supplier, I'd just spend an afternoon drilling them all out. And then I'd probably spend another couple hours cutting and tying off ropes and everything. And then the final step, of course, is I would sink the knots into the balls, because that was the most physically difficult part of that process. So if you've been paying attention, you can actually see how this has informed the structure of the contact poi industry in the past decade. Namely, you'll notice that it tends to be that companies that make contact poi kind of come in two different stripes. One of which is that they don't factor in their labor costs. They only factor in their resource cost in producing their contact poi. So they'll produce stuff that is very, very inexpensive, but they'll also disappear after like a year or two of operation because, quite frankly, they're just not pulling in enough money to make it worth it. The other option is that they reach that critical plateau where they discover that there are more orders coming in than one person can fulfill, and they are in a bind because at that point they either have to invest in additional labor and hire more people to help them make contact poi, or, you know what? That queue grows and their orders get more and more delayed, sometimes for several weeks, sometimes for several months, because one person is the bottleneck. This has happened many times, including with my own business. And it's one of the biggest reasons why I stopped making contact poi, because I kind of saw the writing on the wall there and wasn't looking forward to getting deeply involved in how to put together a labor force to make them and everything. And I actually feel quite lucky that I stopped when I did, because I came just in time to see Lanternsmith come up with a mass-produced option for contact poi. See, one of the cool things that I really love about the Emoji Poi from Lanternsmith is that they took the philosophy behind this and they applied it to this. All of the different components that you have that go into their contact poi are all injection molded, including the heads themselves. This means that they are comparatively easy to put together, and thus that the labor costs are not the biggest cost when it comes to putting these together. I was always a little disappointed when these didn't catch on in a huge way, mainly because the volume of production never really got to the point where they could compete head on with the way that contact poi are manufactured. I still think that it's a possibility, and for those of you who haven't tried out the Emoji Poi, I would strongly encourage it, not the least of which because since there are so many elements of the manufacturing that they are in control of, you can do things like adjust the amount of weight inside of them if, say, you want heavier or lighter heads, which is something you can't really do without changing the overall size of the head itself with traditional contact poi. Now, of course, there are ways that you can try to split the difference between the upfront investment that's necessary for injection molding while also not needing the intense labor that fire poi or contact poi require. And that is in the realm of 3D printing, where basically you can print out plastic parts in a way that you don't require a mold for. They're not quite as durable as the results that you do get out of injection molding, but they're still close enough for jazz. And one of those ways in which they're finding use is these Spend 9 poi from Flotoys. The little end caps here are 3D printed, and I would guess that the reason for that is that the volume of sales for these poi are probably not high enough wherein it's worth it to make the investment to put together an injection molder for this part. Also, too, you can do some rapid prototyping, and if, say, you want to try out different shapes with it, that's a lot easier to do with 3D printing. But, of course, the price per unit with 3D printing is a little bit higher than it is with injection molding. So, for a particular part, you kind of got to figure out what's the best fit. But either way, everything that's on this side of the table can be produced in such a way that it either requires a large or medium upfront investment, and then it can just kind of go on autopilot with minimal labor costs associated with it. That also means that the profit margins are higher and that you have a little bit more leeway in terms of experimentation, in terms of innovation, and trying out new things. And the stuff on this side of the table, well, it may be low upfront investment costs, but those labor costs are just going to mean that you have a little bit less room to work with in terms of coming up with new options, as well as the fact that your price per unit is never ever going to go down. So is there a way around the steep costs of labor for fire props? Something that maybe gets us to a point where the price per unit comes down or we see more innovation in it? I don't know, to be honest with you. When it comes to labor costs, it's a tricky thing because usually the way that companies get around high labor costs is they export their labor to some place where labor is cheaper, which there's a lot of moral costs associated with that too. So as it stands, even though a thing like this is easier to engineer than a thing like this is the thing that's going to be costing more for the foreseeable future. Funny how that works, isn't it? So yeah, there you go. As it turns out, the economics of fire spinning are a lot more complicated than you might think. And it probably means that for the immediate future, we're not going to see the prices go down on fire poi anytime soon. At least probably not until somebody finds a way to make them without having to encourage a large labor cost on them. So maybe you are that enterprising individual who's going to figure out how to do that. Do you have ideas? Let me know down in the comments. In the meantime, if you got anything out of this video, please make sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe to help other people find it, and of course to help my channel grow. And finally, a huge thank you, because this video would not be possible without the kind contributions of these amazing folks right here. These are my Flow patrons over on Patreon, and they, along with the wonderful people listed down in the description, help to make this video and all the videos on my channel possible. If you would like to help me out in my mission of bringing flow arts and poi spinning to the wider world and helping people connect with their brains and their bodies as creative individuals, I'd love to have your help. You can do it by heading over to patreon.com/DrexFactorPoi and signing up. There you can get early access to all of my content, as well as a say in what topics I tackle in the future, plus some great extras and behind the scenes stuff as well. So go check that out. Please and thank you. And a huge thank you to Chad Bennett for that wonderful information on the past, present, and future of fire spinning. Wonderful conversation, and definitely got my gears turning, and I hope it got yours as well. If you would like to check out more videos that I have made on a variety of different flow arts business topics, I'll include a link down in the description as well as up here on the screen if you happen to be watching on YouTube. Make sure that you get outside, get your flow on today, and I will see you with a new video on Wednesday. Peace.